Welcome to our annual Poetry Out Loud finals competition. I'm Mr. Staler, and this is going on 12 years now. I just emailed Mr. Doyle last night, who taught English here for a few years, and he was the person that started this, so it's kind of exciting that we've had this tradition that keeps on going. Before his death from pancreatic cancer, American philosopher Richard Rorty published a brief essay in Poetry magazine. And here's what he said. Some months after I learned the bad news, I was sitting around having coffee with my elder son and a visiting cousin. My cousin, who's a Baptist minister, asked me whether I'd found my thoughts turning toward religious topics, and I said no. Well, what about philosophy, my son asked. No, I replied, neither the philosophy I'd written nor that which I had read seemed to have any particular bearing on my situation. Hasn't anything you've read been of any use, my son persisted. Yes, I found myself blurting out. Poetry. Which poems, he asked. I quoted two old chestnuts I had recently dredged up from memory and been oddly cheered by, the most quoted lines of Swinburne's Garden of Proserpine. We thank with brief thanksgiving, whatever gods may be, that no life lives forever, that dead men rise up never, that even the wariest river winds somewhere safe to sea. In Landor's on his 75th birthday. Nature I loved, and next to nature art. I warmed both hands before the fire of life. It sinks, and I am ready to depart. I found comfort in those slow meanders and those stuttering embers. I suspect that no comparable effect could have been produced by prose. Not just imagery, but also rhyme and rhythm were needed to do the job. In lines such as these, all three conspire to produce a degree of compression and thus of impact that only verse can achieve. Compared to the shaped charges contrived by versifiers, even the best prose is scattershot. I now wish that I had spent somewhat more of my life with verse. This is not because I fear having missed out on truths that are incapable of statement in prose. Rather, it is because I would have lived more fully if I had been able to rattle off more old chestnuts, just as I would have if I had made more close friends. Cultures with richer vocabularies are more fully human, farther removed from the beasts than those with poorer ones. Individual men and women are more fully human when their memories are amply stocked with verses. So, now you probably won't remember every line of the poems you memorized over your time here at LI. And what you do remember may not comfort you in old age, but in taking a bit of verse and making it part of yourself, and stocking your memory with the language of poetry, Professor Rorty would say that you've become a little richer in your experience, just a little bit more human. So today, 9 of your fellow students will show how they've stocked their own sharp memories. Before they do, however, I want to, as I do every year, acknowledge the entire student body. Hundreds of you worked hard to memorize a poem and competed in over 25 different English classes. And winnowing the field to our final contestants was a difficult task, as it always is. So I want to thank all of you who memorized it and performed a poem, those of you who supported your fellow students in doing the same, and most importantly, I want to thank each of you for putting yourself out there and taking a risk. So let's give everyone a nice round of applause. Okay, so with that said, will the following finalists please make their way to the stage and take a seat behind me here. Emily Fogle. Yeah, all right. Quentin Thomas. Katrina Gallagher. Liz Morrison. Ellery Norwood. Sadie Chamberlain. Ainsley Wells. Kit Slicer. And Jessica McAllister. All right, as these contestants make their way up to the stage, I just want to thank the judges for today's competition. We have 3 wonderful judges, and they include former LI teacher and now Vice President of Lyndon Institute's Board of Trustees, Laura Lee Tester. Former LI English teacher and current trustee, and LI Ambassador Extraordinaire, Mike Flynn. And third, Alaina teacher and surfing enthusiast, Roy Starling. Okay, our first contestant, Emily Fogle, will be reciting the poem To Have Without Holding by Marge Piercy, who was born in Detroit, Michigan. An extremely prolific writer, Piercy has published 17 volumes of poetry and 17 novels. She's also written plays, several volumes of nonfiction, a memoir, and has edited the anthology Early Ripening, American Women's Poetry Now. Much of her work addresses themes of feminism, Marxism, and environmentalism. Piercy has also played an active role in a number of political causes, including the anti-Vietnam War movement, the women's movement, and the resistance to the war in Iraq.
To Have Without Holding by Marge Piercy. Learning to love differently is hard. Love with the hands wide open, love with the doors banging on the hinges. The cupboard unlocked, the winds roaring and whimpering in the rooms, rustling the sheets and snapping the blinds that thwack like rubber bands in an open palm. It hurts to love wide open, stretching the muscles that feel as if they are made of wet plaster, then of blunt knives, then of sharp knives. It hurts to thwart the reflexes of grab, of clutch, to love and let go again and again. It pesters to remember the lover who is not in the bed. To hold back what is owed to the work that gutters like a candle in a cave without air. To love consciously, conscientiously, concretely, and constructively. I can't do it, you say. It's killing me. But you thrive. You glow on the street like a neon raspberry. You float and sail, a helium balloon. Bright bachelors button blue and bobbing on the cold and hot winds of our breath, as we make and unmake in passionate diastole and systole, the rhythm of our unbound bonding. To have and not to hold, to love with minimized malice, hunger, and anger, moment by moment balanced.
Our next contestant, Quentin Thomas, will recite the poem After Working 60 Hours Again for What Reason by Bob Hickok. The author of several collections of poems, Hickok once worked in the automotive dye industry and owned his own business, Progressive Technology. He's also taught creative writing at Western Michigan University and Virginia Tech. When asked by interviewer Laura McCullough about the relationship between restraint and revelation in his work, Hickok replied, "Because I don't know where a poem is headed when I start, it seems that revelation has to play a central part in the poems. And what I'm most consistently doing is trying to understand why something is on my mind. Maybe writing is nothing more than an inquiry into presences."
After Working 60 Hours Again for What Reason by Bob Hickok. The best job I had is moving a stone from one side of the road to the other. This required a permit which required a bribe. The bribe took all my salary. Yet because I had no salary, I took a job moving the stone the other way. Because the official wanted his bribe, he gave me a permit for the second job. When I pointed out that the work would be best completed if I did nothing at all, he complimented my brain and wrote a letter to my employer suggesting promotion on stationery bearing the wings of a raptor spread in flight over a mountain smaller than the bird. My boss, fearing my intelligence, paid me to sleep on the sofa and take lunch with the official who required a bribe to keep anything from being done. When I told my parents, they wrote my brother to come home from university to be slapped on the back of the head. Dutifully, he arrived and bowed to receive his instruction, at which point sense entered his body and he asked what I could do by way of a job. I pointed out that there were stones everywhere trying not to move, and all it took was a little gumption to be a man who didn't move them. It was harder to explain the intricacies of not obtaining a permit to not do this. Just yesterday, he got up at dawn and shaved, as if the lack of hair on his face had anything to do with the amount the appearance of food on an empty table.
Joy Harjo was born in Tulsa, Oklahoma, and is a member of the Muskogee, the Creek Nation. Like a few other contemporary Native American poets, such as N. Scott Momaday, Simon Oritz, and Leslie Marmon Silko, Harjo writes in an effort to reestablish lost connections with the sacred land, with powerful ancestors, and with fellow searchers along the margins of contemporary life. She's a noted teacher, saxophonist, and vocalist. She performed for many years with her band Poetic Justice, and currently tours with Aerodynamics. She was named U.S. Poet Laureate in June 2019. This morning, Katrina Gallagher will recite Harjo's Once the World Was Perfect.
Once the World Was Perfect by Joy Harjo. Once the world was perfect, and we were happy in that world. Then we took it for granted. Discontent began a small rumble in the earthly mind. Then doubt pushed through with its spiked head. And once doubt ruptured the web, all manner of demon thoughts jumped through. We destroyed the world we had been given, for inspiration for life, each stone of jealousy, each stone of fear, greed, envy, and hatred put out the light. No one was without a stone in his or her hand. There we were, right back where we had started. We were bumping into each other in the dark. And now we had no place to live, since we didn't know how to live with each other. Then one of the stumbling ones took pity on another and shared a blanket. A spark of kindness made a light. The light made an opening in the darkness. Everyone worked together to make a ladder. A Wind Clan person climbed out first into the next world. Then the other clans, the children of those clans, their children, and their children, all the way through time to now, into this morning light to you.
Liz Morrison will next recite Earth, You Have Returned to Me by Elaine Equity. Elaine Equity's most recent book is Sentences in Rain from Coffee House Press, published in 2015. She teaches at New York University and in the MFA program at the New School.
Earth, You Have Returned to Me by Elaine Equity. Can you imagine waking up every morning on a different planet, each with its own gravity? Slogging, wobbling, wavering, a tilt and out of sync with all that moves and doesn't. For changing pills, adjusting the dosage, never settling. For years we were separate, O Earth, but now you have returned to me.
Ellery Norwood will be performing the poem La Figlia che Piange. I'm not actually sure how to pronounce it. It's Italian. Che Piange by T.S. Eliot. Arguably the most famous poet. Sorry, arguably the most famous poet of the modernist movement, T.S. Eliot revolutionized art first with the love song of J. Alfred Prufrock in 1915, and then with the 1922 publication of his long, difficult poem, The Wasteland. He also became famous for his criticism and later for the poems adapted into the Broadway musical Cats. Although born in St. Louis, he spent most of his adult life in England, working first in banking and then in publishing.
La Filia che Piange by T.S. Eliot. Stand on the highest pavement of the stair, lean on a garden urn, weave the sunlight in your hair, clasp your flowers to you with a pained surprise, fling them to the ground and turn, with a fugitive resentment in your eyes, but weave the sunlight in your hair. So I would have had him leave. So I would have had her stand and grieve. So he would have left, as the soul leaves the body, torn and bruised, as the mind deserts the body it has used. I should find some way, incomparably light and deft, some way we both should understand, simple and faithless as a smile and shake of the hand. She turned away, but with the autumn weather compelled my imagination many days and many hours. Her hair over her arms, and her arms full of flowers, and I wonder how they should have been together. I should lost to gesture and a pose. Sometimes these cogitations still amaze, the troubled midnight and the noon's repose. Thank you.
Our next contestant, Ainsley Wells, will be performing the poem The Story of Ferdinand the Bull by Matt Mason. Mason is the author of The Baby That Ain't Cincinnati, which sounds awesome actually. He lives in Omaha, Nebraska. Mason is a poetry activist in the Omaha area. He operates the Poetry Menu, a website that lists poetry events in Nebraska. Mason's been a member of the team representing Omaha at the National Poetry Slam on multiple occasions and currently serves as executive director of the Nebraska Writers Collective, as well as festival coordinator for the Louder Than a Bomb Great Plains Youth Poetry Festival.
The Story of Ferdinand the Bull by Matt Mason. Dad would come home after too long at work, and I'd sit on his lap to hear the story of Ferdinand the Bull. Every night, me handing him the red book until I knew every word. Couldn't read, just recite along with drawings of a gentle bull, frustrated matadors, the all-important bee, and flowers. Flowers in meadows, and flowers thrown by the Spanish ladies. It's a lesson, really, about not being what you were born into, but what you were born to be, even if that means not caring about the capes they wave in your face, or the spears that cut into your shoulders. And Dad, a wonderful Dad, came home after too long at work and read to me the same story every night, till I knew every word, couldn't read, just recite.
Originally from London, James Lasdun has received numerous awards for his work as a poet, novelist, and screenwriter. In his poetry, Lasdun explores the differences between his English roots and his adopted American home, often setting his poems in wild rural landscapes or barely tamed domestic interiors. Though written in free verse, his poetry can feel formal in its use of rhyme and cadence. He's taught at many universities, including Columbia University, Princeton University, and the New School. He currently lives with his family in upstate New York. His poem, It Isn't Me, will be performed by Sadie Chamberlain.
It Isn't Me by James Lasdun. It isn't me, he'd say, stepping out of a landscape that offered, he'd thought, the backdrop to a plausible existence, until he entered it. It's just not me, he'd murmur, walking away. It's not quite me, he'd explain, apologetic but firm, leaving some job they'd found him. They found him others. He'd go, smiling his smile, putting his best foot forward, till again he'd find himself reluctantly concluding that this, too, wasn't him. He wanted to get married, make a home, unfold a life among his neighbors' lives, branching and blossoming like a tree. But when it came to it, It Isn't Me was all he seemed to learn from all his diligent forays outward. And why it should be so hard for someone not so different from themselves to find what they'd found, barely even seeking what gift he'd not been given. What forlorn charm of his had they the luck to lack? Puzzled them, though not unduly. They lived inside their lives so fully, they couldn't, in the end, believe in him, except as some half-legendary figure, destined or doomed to carry on his back the weight of their own all but weightless stray doubts and discomforts. Only sometimes, alone in offices or living rooms, they'd hear that phrase again, "It isn't me," and wonder, briefly, what they were and where, and feel the strangeness of being there.
Stephen Dunn came into national prominence when his 11th book, Different Hours, won the 2001 Pulitzer Prize. Born in Forest Hills, New York, Dunn took a degree from Hofstra University in History and English in 1962 and was a key player on the school's greatest ever basketball team. He later earned a master's in creative writing from Syracuse University. His accessible work conveys its insights through quiet reflections on everyday events and central human dilemmas. His poem, Proposition, will be performed by Kit Slicer.
Propositions by Stephen Dunn. Anyone who begins a sentence with, "in all honesty," is about to tell a lie. Anyone who says, "this is how I feel," had better love for more than disclosure. Same for anyone who thinks he thinks well because he had a thought. If you say, "you're ugly," to an ugly person, no credit for honesty, which must always be a discovery, an act that qualifies as an achievement. If you persist, you're just a cruel bastard, a pig without a mirror, somebody who hasn't examined himself enough. A hesitation hints at an attempt to be honest, which suggests a difficulty is present. A good sentence needs a clause or two, interruptions set off by commas, evidence of slowing down, a rethinking. Before I asked my wife to marry me, I told her I'd never be fully honest. No one, she said, had ever said that to her. I was trying to be radically honest, I said, but in fact had another motive. A claim without a but in it is at best only half true. In all honesty, I was asking in advance to be forgiven.
Our final recitation comes from Jessica McAllister performing The Hospital Window by James L. Dickey. Although he considered himself first and foremost a poet, James Dickey is best known for his nightmarish 1970 novel Deliverance, made into a popular film. Born in Georgia, he spent most of his life in the South, working first in advertising and then following the success of his first books of poetry as a creative writing professor. His book, Buck Dancer's Choice, which featured harrowing poems about his experience as a bomber pilot in World War II and the Korean War, won the 1965 National Book Award. In 1977, Dickey delivered a poem at Jimmy Carter's inauguration gala.
The Hospital Window by James L. Dickey. I have just come down from my father. Higher and higher, he lies above me in a blue light shed by a tinted window. I drop through 6 white floors and then step out onto pavement. Still feeling my father ascend, I start to cross the firm street, my shoulder blades shining with all the glass the huge building can raise. Now, I must turn around and face it, and know his one pane from the others. Each window possesses the sun as though it burned there on a wick. I wave like a man catching fire. All the deep-dyed window panes flash, and behind them, all the white rooms, they turn to the color of heaven. Ceremoniously, gravely, and weakly, dozens of pale hands are waving back from inside their flames. Yet one pure pain among these is the bright, erased blankness of nothing. I know that my father is there in the shape of his death still living. The traffic increases around me like a madness called down at my head. The horns blast at me like shotguns and drivers lean out, driven crazy, but now my propped up father lifts his arm out of stillness at last. The light from the window strikes me, and I turn as blue as a soul, as the moment when I was born. I am not afraid for my father. Look, he is grinning. He is not afraid for my life either, as the wild engines stand at my knees, shredding their gears and roaring, and I hold each car in its place for miles, inciting its horn to blow down the walls of the world, that the dying may float without fear in the bold blue gaze of my father. Slowly, I move to the sidewalk with my pin-tingling hand, half dead, at the end of my bloodless arm. I carry it off in amazement. High, still higher, still waving, my recognized face fully mortal, yet not. Not at all in the pale, drained, otherworldly stricken, created hue of stained glass. I have just come down from my father.
All right. I'd like to thank all of our finalists. They did an incredible job. All right, so here we go. Very, very close this year. This is probably the closest we've ever had in terms of scoring, and it was sort of almost a virtual tie here at the end. But in third place, Kit Slicer. And Kit, stand up, please. All right, you can just stand. That's fine. Just stay standing. I never planned this part of the whole event very well, so sorry for any awkwardness here. Work on that for next year. In second place, Jessica McAllister. Stand up. And in first place, our winner for this year, and who the student who will go on to represent Lyndon Institute in the state finals, Sadie Chamberlain. In the second round, okay.